Hi, I'm Troy Stetina. Welcome to my video, Beginning Rock Rhythm Guitar. We're going to be looking at chords, riffs, ways to put them together, and talking about how to really make it groove. But first, there's a couple things you should know about the guitar and the amp. This is the guitar. Here's the headstock. These are the tuning machines. This part's called the neck, and it contains the fretboard, or the fingerboard, and the frets. The frets are these metal bars. Also, you should know that to fret a note, you press on the string right behind the fret, not on it. And moving in this direction is called moving up the neck, because the pitches of the notes go up, and this way is down the neck. Here's the body. These are the pickups, and this is the pickup selector switch. And I've got the pickup selector on the back position, so I'm using this, the bridge pickup, for the entire video. These are the volume and tone controls. Here's the bridge, and this is the vibrato bar. Now on the amp, this amp, like most amps today, has two stages of gain. And you can use them to get a clean or distorted sound. To get a clean sound, you turn down the first stage, the preamp, or sometimes called pre-gain, and then the next one would be post-gain, or the next one could be master. You turn down the first one, and it'll sound like this for a clean sound. And then to get it distorted, crank up that first preamp, and you get that. Now in this video, sometimes I'll also be using a distortion pedal to also add another stage of gain and really push the amp over the top. We're going to get started with open chords. So first I want to show you the resting position. That is, when you're not playing anything, you want to hold the strings quiet like this. With your left hand, just lay your fingers over the strings, lightly touching them. Don't press down or you'll actually fret the strings. And with the heel of your right hand, you want to come down and hold them this way. Now the strings can't make any noise until you want them to. Okay, let's take our first chord is E. And here's how you play it. The sixth string, the E string, is open. Now that note is an E note, and it's the root of the chord. In other words, the chord is built on that note, so it names the chord. The next two strings are fretted at the second fret. And I'm using my middle and ring finger to play those two. Then I use my index finger on the next string to play the first fret. And the last two strings are open. We use something called a chord diagram to show this graphically. A chord diagram is just like a picture of the neck of the guitar from this angle. So on the diagram, the top horizontal line will be the nut. Below that, you'll have the first fret, second fret, third fret, fourth fret. And the strings are represented by the vertical lines. The dots will show where to put your fingers, and the O's above a string mean that you're supposed to play that string open. So our next chord is an A. It looks like this. The root of an A chord is the open fifth string. Then you fret the next three strings at the second fret, like this, and the top string is open. Now if you look at that diagram for A, you'll notice that there's an X over the sixth string, which means that you're not supposed to play that string in the chord. Now, to make sure that it won't ring, even if I accidentally hit it, I will put my thumb over the top of the neck like this and lightly touch the sixth string and hold it mute. Now let's look at a D chord. The root of a D chord is the fourth string open, then second fret, third fret, and second fret. Notice this sort of diamond shape here. And with a D chord, you want to mute the bottom two strings. So again, you can use your thumb over the top like this and just lightly touch them. Now let's talk for a second about timing. In music, there's an underlying pulse we call the beat, and everything you play is in relation to that beat. So it's a good idea as you practice to tap your foot along with it. You can also use a metronome to keep your tempo steady. Sounds like this. Today, I'm going to use a drum machine as my sort of fancy metronome. Now, when you're counting time or counting this pulse, it's usually arranged in groups of 4 beats. And each section of 4 beats we call a measure or bar. So here's how you count time or count the pulse along with a drum beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when we play chords in a sequence, we call it a progression or chord progression. So our first progression is E, D, A, E, like this. Here we go with example 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's look at the G and C chords. Here's a G chord. The lowest note in the chord, on the 6th string, right here, is a G note. It's the root of the chord. And now here's a C chord. Again, the lowest note is going to be the root right here on the 5th string, and there's a C. And on C, notice the X again, you want to mute that 6th string, just like we did with an A chord. Our next progression uses G, D, C, D, and it also introduces something called eighth notes. Eighth notes are twice as fast as quarter notes. So an eighth note is 2 notes per beat. There's a note on the downbeat and then halfway in between them on what we call ands or upbeats. So we count eighth notes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So to play this rhythm in eighth notes, we're going to use a strumming approach, which means we're going to play down strokes with the pick on the downbeats and upstrokes on the ands, like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So here we go, example 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. In our next example now, we're going to introduce what we call a syncopation. A syncopated rhythm, or a syncopation, occurs when you take an upbeat and you play it and then you tie it over and hold it over the next downbeat. And when you do this with the strumming approach, you want to keep the same overall strumming pattern. You just skip the note that you're going to tie into. Here's example 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, each of these examples that we've played has been a 4-measure phrase or 4-bar phrase and then we've repeated that 4-bar phrase. The next example uses a shorter 2-bar phrase at a slightly faster tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's talk about minor chords. To change E major into E minor, all you do is lift your index finger so that that 3rd string drops from the 1st fret to open. Here's E major and E minor. Notice how E minor sounds a little different. Both chords have the same root, E, but they have a different quality or color to them. Our next example uses E minor in the progression E minor, C, and D. And it uses a root chord type of strumming approach with a slightly faster tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now to change A major into A minor, here's A major. This note has to drop to there. And in order to do that, we have to shift the fingering around from this to this. There's A minor. And we do the same thing to change D into D minor. Now let's use A minor and D minor in a progression. And this time we're going to introduce something called arpeggiated picking. An arpeggio simply means that the notes of a chord are played in sequence or individually, like this. So, here we go. Number 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now at the end, I played a C chord and a G chord, but instead of using the full shapes, I used only partial shapes. The C used 3 strings like this, and the G used these 3 strings. Now notice how that G comes out of the full G chord shape. Now, instead of having the G, though, in the root, like this chord does, this G chord has a B note in the bass, so we call it a slash chord. It's written G/B, and that means it's a G chord with a B in the bass. Now let's take that same progression and put a finger-picking approach on it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's get into power chords. This is an E5 power chord. Now when I play this, I use the side of my index finger to touch and lightly mute all the other strings so they can't ring, like that. If you compare the E5 chord with E major and E minor, you can see graphically that the note which determines whether the chord is major or minor isn't in the power chord at all. So power chords are ambiguous. They're neither major nor minor. Power chords have an open sounding quality. Here's an A5. We make it the same way. Again, you mute the 6th string with your thumb and the other strings just like you did with the E5 chord. And here's a D5. So example 8 uses these 3 chords in a hard rock, all down-picked approach. as opposed to the strumming, alternating approach we used before. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. We can expand these power chords a little and thicken them by adding in a third string, like this. So lay your first finger flat and E5 becomes this. A5 looks like this. And here's a D5. We can also make G into a power chord. Here's the G major shape. And to make it a G5, we're going to drop out the B note, which is on the 5th string. So we do that by touching it with our middle finger lightly. That way you can hit all 6 strings and it'll still be a G5 power chord. Example 9 also has rests in it, which are simply spaces of silence. To do that, of course, you have to stop all the strings for the duration of the rest. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. The term progression generally describes a situation where the chords are held for a longer period of time, say 1 measure per chord. On the other hand, when we play a very short, self-contained repeating phrase, we call it a riff. Number 10 uses a riff with E, D, and A that sounds like this. And then it goes into a progression and then goes back to the riff. By the way, that's called an A-B-A form. You play something, that's A, and then you play something different, that's we label B, and then we go back and play the first thing again. Also, example 10 introduces the left-hand mute, which is just a matter of holding the strings quiet with the left hand and picking, and it creates a click with no distinct pitch. So here's example 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that you're familiar with these various open chord shapes, let's look at them in a little more detail. First, we're going to look at E. This is the E scale called the Mixolydian mode, and we number the steps of the scale. Here's the root E. This is the second. This is the major third. This is the 4th, 5th, major 6th, a minor 7th, and this note is the octave root. Now, if we take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes, or the 1st, major 3rd, and 5th, we have the notes that make up the E major chord. E, G sharp, and B. That 1, 3, 5 is called a chord formula. Now let's apply it to the E major shape and take a look and see how they fit into the chord. This is, as you already know, the root 1. Here's the 5th. Here's another 1. Here's the major 3rd, 5th, root. Now, to make the chord minor, we drop G sharp down to a G, and our formula for the minor chord is 1, minor 3rd, 5. And here's the voicing for E minor. 1, 5, 1, minor 3rd, 5, 1. And of course, the voicing for the power chords is just 1, 5, or 151, depending on which form you use. Now let's look at the A chord. The A chords are very similar in their shape and voicing. Here's the root, 1, and then it goes 5, 1, major third, 5th. And then for minor, we just use a minor third, 1, 5, 1, minor third, 5th. D, 1, 5, 1, major third, or 1, 5, 1, minor third. There's your D minor. Now let's take a look at the G and C chords. G looks like this, and the voicing for G is 1, major third, 5th, 1, 5, 1. To play a G5, what you do is drop out the third right here, and you have 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. There's also another type of G5 shape that you can play that's very common, and that is dropping out the very top G, or root here, and muting this string as well. So it just looks like this. And finally, the C chord. Voicing for C is, here's your root, and then we have the major third, 5th, root, and major third. So that's it for chord formulas and voicings. Rock and roll grew out of the blues. In fact, to start out with, it was just a revved up version of the blues. So the common blues progression called the 12-bar blues is really at the heart of a lot of rock and roll. In fact, a lot of bands will use pieces or variations of it in their songs. Let's take a look at the progression, but first we have to cover something called tonal center. Now, as you've probably noticed already, all the progressions we've played, the chords tend to gravitate toward one chord in particular, which is the tonal center. And a 12-bar blues progression always has a tonal center. We're going to play our 12-bar in the key of A. Here's how it works. We're going to take that E scale form that you saw before, and we're going to shift it up to A, and we have this. That's A mixolydian. And if we build a chord on the first note, the root or the 1 of the scale, we have what we call the 1 chord, which is A. It's also called the tonic chord, and it's like home base. Then if we go up to the 4th note of the scale, that note's D. And if we build a chord on D, we have the 4 chord. We use a Roman numeral for these numbered chords. Then the next note that's in the blues progression is the 5th note of the scale, E. And that's how we build our 5 chord. So the chords in the blues progression are 1, 4, and 5. In A, that's A, D, and E. Now, what we're going to do is add what we call a comping figure or a rhythm figure to these chords. And it sounds like this. What I'm doing is I'm playing A5 twice, and then I'm playing A6, adding in the 6th here, and then back to the 5. And I'm doing that pattern of 4 notes, or chords actually, over and over. I'm also using a palm mute, and what this is you take the heel of your hand, lay it down here by the bridge, lean it forward, and it gives you that thick, choppy sound. If you go too far this way with your palm mute, you'll kill the strings completely. And if you don't go far enough, you'll be back too much on the bridge, you lose your mute. So you want to find a good middle ground there. The 12-bar blues also uses something called a turnaround at the end to mark the end of that phrase. And the turnaround lick that I'm going to use is based on around the E chord, and the lick goes like this. It uses a technique called a hammer-on. Now here what I'm going to do to play the hammer-on is I pick this note, and here's the hammer-on. Notice I didn't pick it. I just hammer my 3rd finger down to the 4th fret to make that hammer-on. At the end of the lick, I added vibrato to the single note, like that. Now vibrato is just a wavering of the pitch by bending slightly and then releasing over and over. So try it slow. That's what it sounds like. So here we go, number 13. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take the comping figure out of that blues progression, and we're going to apply it to the rock progression that we saw that was example number 1. E, D, A, E. Here we go with number 14. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now for the next example, what we're going to do is add in some accents created by lifting off the strings and opening that mute up. Like that. And we're also going to throw in a lick that uses a bend to bend that G to G sharp. To do the bend, what you do is just pull the string down like that. So here we go with number 15. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to move the progression back to the key of A, and we're going to borrow just the turnaround aspect at the end of the 12-bar blues to play a 1-5-1 progression. We're also going to shift the accents ahead to be on the upbeat of 4 instead of on the downbeat of 1. It creates a syncopation. Now when you play this, you want to make sure that your foot stays tapping on the downbeats and you don't tap out the accent. Here we go. Example 16. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the way, I added in a comping figure on the E chord that was slightly different. What I did was, instead of adding just the 6th, I also threw in the 7th right here. Like that. Now let's take these power chords and slide them up the neck. So first of all, come down here to the E5 chord, and instead of playing it with your first finger, try it with your third finger for a minute. Put your first finger over here on top of the nut and look at that shape. What we're going to do is slide that up a fret, and now we have an F5 power chord. Also, you want to maintain with this index finger the muting position, so none of the other strings will ring. You can then bar it up again to the 3rd fret and you have a G. You bar it up again, here you have A. You can also play these as 3-string power chords. From this E5, you bar that up to the 1st fret. This note is an F, the root of the F5. Up to the 3rd fret, here's a G, G5. And here's the 3-string A5. Example 17 uses the chords A5, F5, and G5. It also introduces 16th notes, which are 4 notes per beat. And to play 16th notes, we're going to use an alternating picking pattern, like this. So, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a minor progression, and to take a look at how a minor progression works, we need to look at the A natural minor scale. It goes like this. A is the root, 1, 2. This is a minor third, 4, 5. This is a minor sixth, minor seventh, and the root again. If you compare that to the Mixolydian that we looked at before, you'll notice that the third is 1 fret lower, and the sixth is also 1 fret lower. Now, when we build a chord on the 1 chord in a minor progression, we call it the 1 chord, but we use a small or lowercase Roman numeral for that. And if you go up to F, F is the 6th note of the scale, so F is our 6th chord. G is our 7th chord. So that progression is a 1, 6, 7 in a minor key. Next, we're going to bar up the A5 chord to play movable chord shapes on the other strings. So, start here, just like we did before. Raise that pattern up. If you go up to the 2nd fret, this is a B. So here's a B5 power chord. You can also play that, again, with 3 strings, like that, to thicken the sound a little. Here's a C5, D5, and this is E5. Now, in each case, you have to make sure not only do you mute these top 3 strings, or 2 if you're playing the 3-string power chord, you also have to mute, very important, to mute the 6th string. And you can do it one of 2 ways. You can either reach your thumb over and touch it, or the way I do it generally is I touch the top of my finger to that 6th string so that it can't ring. You can also play this power chord with your little finger here, which is pretty common because it makes a nice, convenient way to get to the lower string power chords. So here we go, and we're going to move that same minor progression now up to the key of E. Shifting it up to E, the chords become E5, C5, and D5. We're also going to throw in G up here and A down here. Example 19 also introduces the idea of using a palm-muted pedal tone. Now, a pedal tone just means that you're going to hold one note throughout the progression. As the chords change, you'll hold one note through them, and we're going to hold that note by consistently going back to palm mutes, and we're going to use palm mutes on the low E string. Now, you have to make sure that when you go to the palm mutes, you get a nice tight mute, and then on the chords, you open up completely, like this. So, here we go. Example 19. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to expand those power chords into full bar chord shapes. So what we're going to do is come down here and play an E chord, but instead of using these 3 fingers, switch it around so you're using these 3. And now your first finger is available to form the bar. Now slide everything up a fret, and now you have an F major chord. Slide up to G, and you have a G major. And this is A major. And we do the same thing for the A chords. Take an A major chord and play it with these 3 fingers. And let's slide it up to, say, the 3rd fret to make a C major. This chord's a little awkward, though, so most times people will just play it like this, laying the 3rd finger flat over all 3 strings here, and then muting the last string. Much easier. There's D major, and there's E major. Now we're going to use those major chords in a short 2-measure 1-4-5 pop-type progression. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's bar up the E minor and A minor chords. E minor looks like this. So when we bar it up a fret, now we have F minor. Here's G minor, and here's A minor. And when we take this A minor chord and bar it up, there's B, so here's B minor, C minor, D minor, and E minor. So now we're going to go back to examples 17 and 19 and play them with full major and minor bar chords. Number 21. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's take a look in example 22 at that same progression that we used in number 19, and this time we're going to use it with full bar chords. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if we take that same progression and this time move it up to B, we'd have this in the key of B minor. And we're going to use this progression to show how you can use partial bar chords. It's still using the exact same chords, but this time I'm only going to play these 3 strings. So it would be B minor, A, G, A. And I can dress it up a little by throwing in an extra note with my little finger. Well, it goes like this. Remember that A mixolydian scale we played? Now we're going to bar it up so that we start on the 6th string. It looks like this. A, the root. Here's the 2nd, major 3rd, 4th, 5th, major 6th, minor 7th, and your octave root. And we're going to use that scale here to demonstrate intervals. An interval is the distance between pitches. So the distance from the 1st note to the 5th of the scale we call an interval of a 5th. It happens to be an A5 power chord. The distance from the 1st to the 4th is called a 4th. So that shape is a 4th. Now if we look at this A5 power chord with 3 strings again and look at it a little more closely, you'll see there's actually 3 intervals in it. From the 1st up to the 5th is the interval of a 5th. Then from the 5th to the octave root there happens to be a 4th shape. And then there's the 3rd interval is the octave from A to A. Now, if we take the bottom note and we drop it off of our A5 power chord, we have these two notes left. That's still an A5 chord, but now it's in the shape of a fourth. So we could call it an A5 fourth dyad. We could do the same thing on the next string. If we had a C chord, we could play C5 fourth dyad like this. And here's D. In the next example, I use these types of fourth dyads, and I also use an A pedal tone. And as I play the dyads, I'm going to put a little vibrato, a little slow, smooth rock and roll vibrato. Here we go, number 24. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now let's continue with some more intervals. If we go back to that fifth shape that we had here in A, we'll start there and then drop the top note one fret, and you have what's called a diminished fifth. It's a nice, nasty tone. Then you drop it another fret, and you have the fourth that we already learned. Drop it one more fret, and you have a major third. When you drop or go up a half step at a time like that, that's called chromatic movement. Example 25 uses this type of chromatic movement to play a riff in the key of C, where C is held as a common tone through each of these different intervals. Here we go with example 25. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if we take those intervals and we invert them by raising the bottom note up one octave, a fifth becomes a fourth. If we invert the diminished fifth, it becomes the same shape. If we invert a fourth, we now have a fifth, and an inverted major third becomes a minor sixth. Now we're going to take these inverted intervals and use them in example 26 with a finger-picking approach like this. So here's example 26. 2, 3, 4. To create shuffle or swing rhythms, we start with the eighth note triplet, which is 3 notes evenly spaced per beat. An eighth note triplets sound like this. And then to create the shuffle rhythm, what we do is we tie together the first two, so you're only going to pick the first note of the triplet and the third note of the triplet. And then you have this rhythm. That's the shuffle rhythm. Now what we're going to do is apply that to a 1-4-1 progression, that's A, D, A, in the key of A. And we're also going to throw in at the tail end of that phrase a little bend where we pull G up to A real slow, like this. Okay, so here we go with example 27. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's talk about double time. Double time means that you're going to play the notes twice as fast in relation to the beat. Or another way to arrive at double time would be to cut your tempo in half and maintain the same speed of the notes. So if we take the shuffle rhythm and we put that in double time, we've got this. So anyway, we're going to use a double time shuffle in our next example, number 28. And we're also going to introduce a new chord form, and that is the C bar chord. So what we're going to do is come down here to this part of a C. It's actually a partial bar chord. And take these three notes, play them with these two fingers, and bar it up the neck. Here it becomes a D chord, because the root of that form would be here, which is on a D note. Example 28 also introduces a technique called artificial harmonics. It's also called pinch harmonics or pick harmonics because they're produced with a right-hand picking technique. Now what this technique does is it takes a note and instead of just sounding straight like this, it sounds like this. What I'm doing is picking and at the same time touching lightly with the side of my thumb and then moving away from the string. And depending on exactly where on the string you pick, it produces different harmonics. So let's get started with example 28, double time shuffle in A with C partial bar chords and artificial harmonics. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now that you're familiar with some of the basics of chords and rhythm playing, get out and get some recordings and transcriptions of all the tunes you really like and dig in. Remember, staying motivated is the key, because if you're motivated, you're going to keep practicing and you're going to get there. And remember, there's no uncool songs. If you like a song, then it's cool and you should learn it. Also, if you want to learn more about music and playing guitar, you can check out the other videos in this series: beginning rock lead guitar, metal rhythm guitar, and electric blues. And I have a series of books called the Stetina series, which includes a metal lead guitar method, a metal rhythm guitar method, and an advanced technique book called Speed Mechanics for lead guitar. It also includes a number of other books. Well, that's it for now. Keep your rhythms solid and strong, and take care. Good luck with your playing.